Welcome friends to Farm Fresh Designs 59. In today's video, I'm making a couple spring projects and then I'm going to be making some things for my front porch for the summer. So let's get started. So this is a plaque that I thrifted and I needed it to have some extra texture. So I'm using super heavy gesso that I find at Hobby Lobby. And I just use that little palette knife to just put it all over. And I want there to be some peaks and valleys. I don't want it to be smooth at all, but I want it to have that roughness to it. Now, this takes quite a bit to dry, so I actually let it sit during the daytime while I'm out babysitting, and then when I come home, I'm going to be painting it with Rust-Oleum Chiffon Cream. So after it's all painted, then I begin to get together the things that I'm going to put on top of this plaque. And I'm using the IOD trimmings 4 that came out this spring. And I put cornstarch in my mold, and then I use DOS air dry clay. And when you're doing a bigger piece like this, you want to hold it right in the middle because as you push it down into that mold, it might lift up just a little bit. So I like to keep one hand on it. And then I go back over it with just an old credit card to smooth it out on the back. And I get all of my IOD products from Decoupage Central, and I will make sure to share that link in the description box below. Now, I know that this piece is going to be a little bit wider than what I need, but if you notice on a lot of the trimmings mold, IOD does it so well. They make them be where you can connect them. So either one of these sides are going in the opposite direction. And then if you need to make 2 pieces, it makes it really easy to fit together. So I just lay it up there and then I use that little credit card to kind of cut off what I don't need. And then I'm putting it on with Tight Bond Thick and Quick, which is in the blue and the gray bottle. And I just put it all over the backs of it and go all the way to the edge. And then I'm going to be putting it on this plaque, but I'm going to be leaving a little bit of space down at the bottom. I don't want it to be at the very edge. But when I pick it up and I start moving it around, it stretches just a little bit. So once I get it on there and I have it glued, then that little extra part that's stretched, I just use the credit card to pull that off. So next I'm going to be making an air dry clay mold from the IOD mold called Anchithus. And I just need one of those pieces and I put in the clay just like I did before with cornstarch and my DOS air dry clay, and then I smooth it out on the back with a credit card. Now once I get this made, I'm just actually going to lay it up there. I'm not going to glue it down because I need to just figure out exactly where I need these pieces to be before I glue them down. So next, this is one of the molds, and it's a little bit older, and it's called Sunflowers. And I'm going to be making one of the large sunflowers. The other little pieces are just different parts of the sunflower with the leaves, and I'm not going to actually be using those. And because this is a bigger piece, remember, it's important to keep your hand right in the middle. So as that you pull that credit card out to the very edge, it doesn't lift up off of the mold. And then I just roll that mold off of it, and that cornstarch allows it to just come right out. And then my last mold for this particular piece will come from the IOD mold called Laurel. And I just need one of the little bumblebees, and I'm going to be putting it up on top of that sunflower as if it is flying into the middle. Now, I haven't glued those pieces down because right now I'm going to be stamping one of the pieces from the IOD stamp called Ephemera Type. And I love this stamp. I love all of the script on it. And I like it because it's got different sizes and just different pieces to it that just make it perfect for a lot of your projects. And I'm using IOD Stone Gray ink to put all over it, and then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to put it up in the top right-hand corner. And then once I put that down, I don't let that little stamp wiggle at all. And this is just a little stamp press that I get off of Amazon, and that just helps when you've got larger pieces that you want to stamp. So I just rub it all over that, and then I pull it straight up. So now I'm ready to put all of the other molds on it. So I use my Tight Bond Thick and Quick to put on the back of my little swirly piece. And then I'm going to put that same glue onto this sunflower. Now this sunflower is rather large, and I actually want it to fall over onto that script that I just stamped. But that's fine because I needed it to look that way. And then because it's so large, what I'm going to do is I want to use my little credit card to chop off that side because I want that sunflower to look like it's falling onto that plaque. And with all my molds, once I put them on, I just very gently tap on the edges to make sure that it is connecting with my piece, but I don't touch it very hard because I don't want it to mess up any of the details. And then I put my little bee right in the middle. So after all of my molds have set up for about 10 to 15 minutes, I like to go ahead and paint them because that helps reduce with the cracking. And so I'm going to be painting over all of these molds with that same Rust-Oleum chiffon cream that I used on the background. And I'm using a very soft bristle brush to put that on. And I found these little soft bristle brushes at Walmart back in the craft section. But I really like these. There's a lot of different sizes in the pack. So now that that's all put on, I want to add one more piece of dimension to it. So I'm going to be using my IOD Vintage Texture stamp, and it's the crackle finish. And I use this one so often that I don't actually even put it back in the stamp set. I just leave it on my crafting table because I do use it so much because it adds just a little bit of extra detail to your piece. Now, I don't want to use any extra color on this plaque because I want it to be more neutral. So once all of that is dry, then I use my Dixie Belle Voodoo Gel Stain, and I put a little bit on just on that sunflower, and then I go ahead and use a baby wipe to wipe it back. And then I just do little by little, and I continue to wipe it back. And the reason I do just a little bit at a time is that it's going to set up. And so if I put it over the entire part that I want to put that voodoo gel stain on, and if I let it sit for a little bit, then it's not going to come off very easy, and it's going to be darker in some places and not in the other. So I want it to be pretty consistent all over. And then once I finish all of those pieces, then I go back over the background of it and put that same voodoo gel stain on it. But on this one, I don't really wipe it back. I sort of kind of blot it because I want that to look a little bit more mottled, and because I want it to look more like it's maybe a plaster finish to it. And here's the final piece. So what do you think about my sunflower plaque? And this is actually going to be a gift for someone who really loves sunflowers. This is not going to stay at my house for me. So my next plaque, I'm going to be using that same super heavy gesso technique because this had a saying that was sort of carved into it, and I need to make sure that even though after I put the wood putty in those letters, those words still don't show up. So once that gesso dried, then I'm going to be painting all over it with Rust-Oleum Serenity Blue, which is such a pretty color, and this is actually even pretty in the fall. And then I'm using the larger piece of lattice from the IOD stamp Veranda, which is such a wonderful background stamp. And I'm using the IOD Stone Gray ink, which is a really pretty ink because it's not quite so bold, but you can clearly see it on your pieces. And once again, I use that little stamp press to go all over it. Now, what I really love about this lattice stamp, it is so easy to connect the pieces. Now, if you noticed, I pulled it up and I noticed that one of those pieces did not ink up very well. So I just laid it down very carefully and rubbed it back over it. And then I was able to get that ink onto that surface. And I started in the middle because on either side, I wanted it to be the same distance on either side when I needed to finish off with that stamp. So I just stamped that little section down at the bottom, which is so easy to do with this lightest stamp. And then I'm going to be going and I'm going to be putting it on the side. Now, if you noticed, I got a little bit of ink on the bottom when I stamped it, and I get a little bit of ink on it this time. But what I like about the IOD ink is not only is it permanent, but if you make a little mistake and you get ink on your project, if you'll very quickly use a little baby wipe, it's going to come off. And if you wait too long, you may have to paint over it a little bit, but just having that baby wipe off to the side just in case you make a little boo-boo, then it just helps to pull it off real quick. So next I'm going to be using some pieces from the IOD Classic Elements mold, and I'm going to be putting it in the same way, cornstarch in my molds, DOS air dry clay, and then I smooth it over the back with a credit card. Now, one of the reasons that I like this mold so much is because it has this little teeny braided trim that can go all around the edges. So I go ahead and make a lot of those because they're going to be on 3 sides of this little plaque. And then I went on and made some of the little pieces that I like to call parentheses, and they came from the IOD Olive Crest mold. Now with these little pieces, I want to make sure that I line them up really well, and I use my DOS air dry clay to put them on. And I try to kind of butt them up against each other, but once they dry, if you notice that there's a little gap in it, then you can just take a little piece of air dry clay, kind of roll it between your finger and just kind of put it in between that little gap, and then you won't be able to see it at all after that. So I'm going to be putting this little piece up at the top, and then those little pieces that are parentheses, I'm going to be putting those from up at the top to connect it to that beaded trim on the sides. Now, initially, I was going to use those little parentheses pieces down at the bottom to connect that beaded trim from one side to the next. But when I did that, I just couldn't make them look right because I had to squish them up too much. So I made a little piece of that same beaded trim, and I just shaped it in the way of the plaque so that it would connect those side pieces. And that is the beauty of using clay in your molds, because you can like move it around just a little bit and curve it around pieces that you can't normally do with resin. So I go back over all of these pieces after about 10 to 15 minutes, and I use that same Rust-Oleum Serenity Blue. Now here's another stamp from the ephemera type set, and I'm going to be putting that up in the top right hand corner with the IOD Stone Gray ink. Now this is a heavy piece of clear acrylic, so I don't need to use that little stamp press on this. And then I want to put a little bit of script, once again from the ephemera type stamp set, down at the bottom, because I just want a little bit of extra script on it just to add some interest to it. Now this is a resin casting from the IOD Frames 2 mold that I've already had made up, and I paint it with Rust-Oleum Chiffon Cream. So once that gets all finished, I spray it with some clear sealer, because now I want to use one of the transfers from the IOD transfer set that came out this spring called Katharina, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that right in the middle. And with the transfer, you pull off the back sheeting, you lay that transfer on, and then IOD gives you a little clear plastic tool that you're going to use, and you're going to rub that all over the transfer. And then what I like to do is rub it over all of it and then start back up at the top and then just pull it back just a little until I work my way all down to the bottom. And then once again, I use my Titebond Thick and Quick to put that right in the middle. So once that glue sets up, and I know it's not going to move at all, then I go back in on this plaque and I use clear wax all over the plaque. But around the edges of this resin casting and around the edges of the plaque, then I use Dixie Belle Grunge Gray Wax on top of that clear wax, because when you use a darker wax, you want to put down clear wax first, because once you put that dark wax down, if you don't like it, it's going to be hard for it to come off. But if you put the clear wax on first, then, and you don't like it, you can pull it back off, or you can use a little bit more of that clear wax to rub over it, and that will lift off that dark wax. But I wanted there to be just a little bit of extra dimension around the edges of not only the frame in the middle, but also on the edge of the plaque. So tell me, what do you think about this plaque? So my next 3 pieces are actually going to be going out on my front porch, because in the summertime, my granddaughters and I like to sit out on the porch swing and watch the hummingbirds play in our front yard. So this is an older window, and because I know that it's old and that paint could possibly have some lead in it, then I made sure to use some heavy gloves, and I used a mask to clean it in case there was any lead in the paint. So once I cleaned it all up and had those windows clean in it, then it makes it really easy to put a transfer in it. And I used 3 different pages from the new IOD transfer set called Lost Gardens. And I want that one bigger sprig to be right there in the middle, and then the 2 side pieces, I'm going to use like 2 different pages, but I'm only going to use sections of them, and they sort of mimic the colors that are in that middle section. Now, when you put a transfer on glass, all you need to do is clean it. You don't have to put any sort of sealer on it, but the only difference is that afterwards, I do not currently know of a sealer that you can put on top of a transfer to make that window stay clear. So when I hang this window up, there is just going to be the transfer on it and no sealer. But I'm okay with that because it's not going to actually be hanging right in the sun. And then I put 2 hooks up at the top, but when I was getting ready for my video, my husband went out to the building to try to find some chain to hang it up for the little hooks that I put up at the top, and the chain wasn't right. So before the summertime rolls around, I'm going to have to find some chain that's going to be strong enough to hang it with. And actually, when I was making this little film, what I did was I put some white fabric behind it so you could see the beauty of this transfer. But don't you just love this transfer set? I think it's so beautiful, and I love how the flowers are just so wispy and free looking. And this transfer set has so many florals in it that even if you didn't want to be using the big sheets of it, it's really easy to cut it up and use different smaller sections. So this next piece is actually going to be the top for a little side table. And I painted it white, and I sprayed it with Rust-Oleum Clear Sealer. And these are just some little pieces from that same transfer set called Lost Garden. And I'm going to be putting those pieces all around the top of this. So you're going to see it sitting on the table in just a minute. But it was just an old little metal table that didn't actually have a top to it. And this was a piece of wood that I just found at the thrift shop, and it already had the beading on it. So I'm going to actually glue this top to the little metal table. It doesn't actually screw in, so once I finish all of this up, then I'll be just adding it to that table that actually didn't have a top. And I put these transfers all around the outside edges of this little piece. And the little pieces actually came in like a little half circle, but I just cut them up so it looked like one whole wreath that went all around the edge. And on this, when I use that little transfer tool, I use that little plastic piece to rub all over it just to make sure that all the little pieces of the transfer went down. And then I'm going to spray it again with Rust-Oleum Clear Sealer just to protect the transfers on this particular piece. But before I show you the final project, I want to show you just a little candlestick that I had thrifted, and I'm going to be setting that on top of the little table because I need that to put like one of those citronella candles on. So these are just some little pieces from the IOD Blossoms mold that came out this spring. And I love this mold. I think it's probably one of my new favorite molds because I love that these flowers are so small. And so once again, I'm using my DOS air dry clay to take some of those little pieces, and I have painted the candlestick white, and I just put just a little bit of these blossoms on the candlestick. I don't want to put it all around it because I think it would make it too busy. So I use just a little bit on one side, and I just kind of tuck it into those little curves, and it's super easy. But because I hadn't really decided what I wanted to do with it all of the way, then I just went on and put some Rust-Oleum linen white chalk paint to go ahead and cover up that clay until I decided the colors I wanted to use on it. So on just the little branches, I just used some Waverly chalk paint in the color Mineral to cover up those little branches. And then on the flowers, I actually was going to use a lighter pink, and then it didn't look right because the pink in the flowers for the table were more of a darker pink. And so I just painted back over those with a Dixie Belle color that's more of a darker pink. And then I used a folk art paint to color the leaves, and the folk art color is called Basil Green. And then I got all of those painted up, and I sprayed that with Rust-Oleum Clear Sealer just to protect it. And this will be sitting on top of the table out on the porch as we're sitting there watching the hummingbirds play in the front yard, and we'll have a citronella candle burning so we won't get any bug bites in the summertime. So tell me, what do you think? So friends, I want to invite you to my Facebook page called Farm Fresh Designs on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock because I always have a Facebook Live on that particular day on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'd love for you to join me and my friends so that we can craft together and we can chat with each other online. So in the comments below today, tell me, what do you think? What is your favorite piece? And do you like to sit out on the porch in the summertime and just to watch the birds? So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel and become part of our family. And if no one has told you today, I just want you to know that I love you and God loves you. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you, friends.